Hello, and welcome back to another Pen Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for choosing to join me as I explore the wide world of pens. And there's one rotating in front of you. And it is not being held up by a crab because it is not crab worthy. It does, though, merit a turntable. Some of you may recognize this pen. It recently showed up through the normal selling channels for Chinese pens. Yes, it's a Moonman. Yes, it's an M700, so they're going through the numeric hundreds as far as series of pens goes. And I got it because I thought this was a striking resin. It was not inexpensive. Here's the eBay listing. And we're going to explore this pen. We're going to see why it is not crab worthy. We're going to zoom in a little bit to hopefully take a look at this interesting resin. It certainly is a striking, dynamic series of contrasts. One might think that it's kind of in that Arco family, but nah, not quite. Yes, it does have stripes, and probably the way the resin is made is similar. So let's take a look at this pen in detail and see if you like it. The first thing that strikes me is this pen is lighter than it looks. You expect it to have a little bit of heft to it because it's not a small pen. It does have a little bit of elegance associated with it, but I find the design elements just don't work together. These wide bands, this one here is totally unnecessary. It would have been better if that band wasn't there, and if this band was thin like the band that holds in the clip, or maybe remove both of these bands. Yes, it has a Aero design clip, not unusual. And yes, it has that dual fold shape, but I wouldn't put it directly in the dual fold family. And yes, that resin does lend itself for some interesting observations, and I do enjoy looking at it. The cap comes off in 2 1/4 turns, and we'll see one of the reasons why the pen is expensive. It has a Bock nib, which we've seen on other Moonmans. Bock feet on the back. Yeah, I'm pretty certain it's a fine. Bock doesn't label their pen nibs. In the hand, again, the fact that it's so light, you definitely notice it, or don't notice it because it is so light. That section, considering the size of the pen and that number 6 nib, that section is on the small side, and it's basically a little bit smaller than I like, but with such a light pen, you're not going to be gripping it hard. Those threads you don't really feel, so you can hold it anywhere. And as expected with this design, the cap posts extremely high. I mean, it only goes on a few centimeters. I mean, it doesn't really change the balance much because that cap is very, very light, and it's relatively secure. So the other thing I think that detracts from this pen is we reveal the converter. A lot of threads, which are good. We'll look inside with the LED, but that's not a pen I would ever eyedrop. And we see what I would call a very, very low-end converter. You know, it's no insert here, no metal band here. I guess it would pull apart, and there is a little plastic ball in there. But this is all machined acrylic, which is fine, but most of the pens in this dual fold design have a metal insert here, which I think adds to stability. Sometimes a metal trim ring here, metal trim ring there, which I can leave it. But then when you got these metal bands here, you know, I don't quite understand that designed that they're going for and look for. But to me, the nib And I expect this resin, which I haven't seen in any other Chinese pens, makes it at that higher price point. And we'll take a look at some other pens at this price point, and I'll compare some of those differences. As expected, the Bock nib assembly just unscrews from the section. I like the fact that it has that nice O-ring at the bottom, which to me seals up and keeps ink from getting between that nib collar and the section. So that I do like. Dark in the room, I think it's time to bring in the LED examination light. I always like to show the pens under different lights, and this is certainly an eye-catching resin. If we look inside the cap, we'll notice there's no screw. You see that cap finial there. So my guess is that cap finial is threaded into the top of the cap, and that's what holds the clip in place. I tried a little bit of pressure to remove the finial. I'm not going to go overboard with it. And if we look inside the barrel, nice fairly thick walls there, which is also good. We'll see nothing particular, but we do see at the bottom there that same design on the cap. So my guess is this is also either threaded or glued in place along with those two rings. If we go in with the LED light, you'll see a little bit of light show up occasionally through those lighter colored bands. We need to look inside the cap. There we'll see a little bit more. It is a unique resin, at least in my perspective. Maybe it's a similar process to what Pelican uses for their barrels. Who knows? Inquiring minds ask that question. So here are some comparison pens. This is the $40+ Jinhao Centennial 100. Here is the Moonman M600, which also came with the German nib. And here's a Kaigelu 316 in a very nice classic resin. So the stripes, I think, are comparable to the Czechs, but I still prefer the Czech acrylic design. If you look at the top of the cap, you'll notice that the Kaigelu has a nice little insert. So does the Jinhao, but the Moonman M700 doesn't, and neither did any of the Moonman M600s. So, to me, you need to consider value and also personal satisfaction. For a little bit over $20, the 316 to me is the bargain of this group. Great nib, upscale converter, a lot of metal bits in here. This is the heavy pen version. If we take this out and bring in the new version, which is comparable in weight, also notice that these have finials top and bottom that are not black, so I don't consider it a classic dual fold design if they're not black in the section also. So they've done something a little bit different in the M700. Do I like the pen? Yes. Is it a great pen? I'm on the fence on that one. I can't call it a great pen, but we haven't seen it right yet, so that opinion may be subject to change. So I did do a video on these two newer 316 models from Kaigelu. And here's like an in-between model, which was late 2020. I like this pen so much, I bought the two other colors. And I bought them on AliExpress, and I hope to get them in a week or so. And I'm pretty much certain I'll show them to you. So I decided on this ink. I figured a nice German blue ink would go well with this German nib. It's as good a fill as I could get, going up and down a couple times. It's still probably, 0.8 mils or something like that. Good enough ink for what we're going to be doing. The color card for the royal blue. There may be a slight bit of sheen there in that glob I laid down. The chromatography is very nice. I mean, that's a clean blue color. It's not a blue that most people talk about when they say, what are your greatest and best blues, but certainly is in my ballpark. We're ready for that all-important how does it write section of the video review. But before we do that, let's have some editorial comments. Moonman M700, I have no idea how to pronounce it, but there are multiple listings for this pen on eBay, and the Moonman is priced higher. It's also on Etsy, an easy buy, similarly priced, and they all have Bock nibs, so that's not a difference. It's not like one has a more generic nib that would lower the cost. And they all come in the 3 colors. So he talked about this cap coming off in about 2 1/4 turns. The threads just don't quite engage as well as I would like. It's almost you could feel you could cross thread it. I tend to be very careful when I thread things. So I'm probably going to put a little silicone grease on those threads to facilitate it threading a little bit easier. I mentioned that section. We'll give you the dimensions of the section. I'll also give you the weight of the pen. And as I mentioned and shown, posting is possible for those who must post, and Alan will probably find us okay posted, but not a pen I would post. That length is amazing. We'll give you those lengths. So why does this pen exist? That's a good question. Maybe Moonman wanted to expand their flat top pen line. Maybe there was some pen designer that considered this their grail pen and wanted to make it, and so they did. I'm still confused over the 2 different names, Moonman and Mojiang. I'm butchering it, but we'll give you the way that it's spelled. So that's an interesting philosophical exercise, but to me, is it a pen I like to write with? Is it a pen I like to look at? Is it a pen that I like to have in my hand? And I'd have to say it only satisfies 1 out of 3. I do like looking at it, and maybe 2 out of 3, but let's see how that Bock nib writes. Writing impressions, I'm impressed. The nib writes very well. It is very smooth. This is the best fine Bock nib I've ever written with. I'm not a fine nib person, but I could live with this. The pen is risen, in my view, based on this nib. So I think it's time to rate the pen. I'm going to give it an 8.1. And I just give it 1 check for the nib. But it's, Bock fine nib, and it's a good Bock fine nib, but it feels a little bit of softness to it, but those tines don't really spread. So that's not going to be something you're going to do. I have never written reverse with this, and I normally don't do that, but let's see how it works. Not something I would do on a regular basis. And if I was going to use a pen in reverse writing, I would use some micro mesh on there, because they do design the nib and manufacture the nib to write this way. They don't do that to write this way. There are some nibs that might be designed for dual writing, and some of you that have watched my videos may have seen the most amazing nib at writing on both sides that I've ever used. So we've reached the conclusion of this video. I hope you find it interesting. I'd like to thank you for watching. I think I could enjoy this pen more over time, but it's never going to be a favorite. I hope this video finds you safe, healthy, and happy, enjoying your pens, enjoying putting ink on paper, thoughts, letters, journals, scribbles, doodles, whatever. You've reached the end of this video, and the pen starts up right away. You know, give you a good everyday carry if you enjoy the pen and that section will work for you. You never know. Everybody has their own views on things. A phrase that I've lived with for most of my life: one man's ceiling is another man's floor. So on that note, we will say bye. Is this a ceiling or a floor for you? And that ink is very nice also.